Hey there, this is your teacher, Mr. H, and you're watching History in a Hoodie. Today's episode is about the royal period of Georgia, where we will learn all about what happened after the trustees. I can't wait to find out, so let's get this show started. What are we learning about today? The standard for today's lesson asks students to explain the transition of Georgia into a royal colony, with regard to land ownership, slavery, alcohol, and government. Before we start, let's go over some vocabulary for today's lesson. The royal governors were leaders appointed by King George II to run colonial Georgia. The trustee period was an experiment led by Oglethorpe and his friends to see if a colony could become successful both economically and socially with the right set of rules, leaders, and citizens. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Frustrated with their lack of success, in 1750 the colony was handed back over to King George II, who would administer Georgia through the use of royal governors. This was the beginning of the relatively short royal period of the Georgia colony. Short on time, but not short on impact. Georgia was run by 3 royal governors for the remaining 16 years of our colonial history, and they were John Reynolds, Henry Ellis, and James Wright. They, along with the Colonial General Assembly, the legislative branch, would eliminate all of the trustees' rules for Georgia and pass new ones that would set the colony, and soon after the state, in a completely different direction. Some of the major differences between the governor's rule versus the trustees' rule included changes to laws about land ownership, slavery, and alcohol consumption, also known as everything the malcontents complained about. Under royal rule, colonists could buy larger plots of land, and, in a surprising for that time move, they also allowed women to own land. More people moving to the colony resulted in rapid expansion of the existing towns like Savannah and Darien, but also the beginning of newer settlements as well. The ban on alcohol ended with the governors, as well as the ban on slavery. Within the first 5 years of the royal period, the number of slaves in Georgia went from 0 to 18,000. These slaves were mostly from the African continent, however, some were also captured natives. Slaves were given the most demanding tasks, such as working in the rice fields of colonial Georgia. They had no rights and were treated like property, as they were in just about every other colony. Additional changes to the colony included the establishment of a court system, but only for white male landowners, the development of trade agreements with the local Creek tribes, the creation of a colonial militia, and the construction of roads, really dirt paths, to connect the early colonial towns. So what? What were the immediate and long-term impacts of Georgia's transition to a royal colony? The major impact of the royal governors and their decision to end the trustees' restrictions was economic impact. The population and the value of the land grew significantly in the decades following the end of the trustees' rule. While the changes to land ownership made a dent in the economic impact, slavery was really the only major cause of growth of Georgia's economy. Prior to the end of trustees' rule, there was significant debate in the colony about whether or not slavery should be permitted. After seeing the profits, the debate had ended. Slavery would be an essential piece of Georgia's early history. Prior to the Civil War, the richest state in the United States was Mississippi, and many of the other southern states were following close behind, economically riding the wave of slavery. According to the Georgia Encyclopedia, quote, almost every white person in the Georgia Low Country at that time believed that the institution of slavery was essential to his or her economic prosperity. During the remainder of the colonial period, no white Georgian voices were raised to challenge that assumption. End quote. One such long-term impact of the colonial period has to do with how colonial America, and later independent America, treated the idea of slavery. Slavery had existed for hundreds or thousands of years all around the world, whether as a result of being conquered by an empire or as an individual punishment for failure to pay your debts. Colonial America took the concept of slavery and ramped it up to 11. Enslavement was for life, not just 7 to 10 years of indentured servitude as was typical in medieval Europe. Not only was the person enslaved, but also any children he or she gave birth to during captivity. Slaves were treated, both legally and societally, as property, not as human beings. They were not allowed to marry, practice their own cultural beliefs, or be educated at all, and they were brutally punished for any violation of the rules or attempts to escape. The slave-based economy and society became so ingrained in the Southern lifestyle that when challenged, the states were prepared to fight over it, a practice that at the beginning of Georgia's history did not even exist, and where at least a part of the colonial population questioned if their colony needed it in the first place. Now what? What am I going to do with this information? There is an old TV ad for an ice cream treat which says, "What will you do for a Klondike bar?" For example, would you act like a chicken in the middle of your office? And ultimately the actor will do whatever they ask, no matter how foolish and against their better judgment, for the chocolatey, ice-creamy goodness of the Klondike bar. While this is a dramatic example of people manipulating their behavior for a reward, it is not the only way that people have abandoned their personality, morals, and ethics for rewards. During the trustee period, there was a major debate about the institution of slavery. A couple years later, almost no one in Georgia was speaking against the immorality of owning another person. Why? Wave a couple dollars in front of someone's face and they change their tune very quickly. Not really just a couple dollars, more like hundreds to thousands, but you get the point. Many people throughout history have abandoned their character and their finer qualities because of money, but we can learn something from their failures. We can learn to be skeptical of a person's claims when they are under the influence of wealth and riches. What may sound like good advice for you may be a deception to cheat you. That's why we have the important lesson of, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't true. I got this email from a Nigerian prince who wants to give me $1 million, but I'm not giving him my social security and bank account numbers. Life lessons, kids. Wow, so learning about Georgia's royal period is really important for us to understand. I'm glad we learned it today. Are you ready for some review questions? How did government in Georgia change when the colony moved from the trustee period to a royal colony? How did slavery impact Georgia's economy? Which is true regarding Georgia during the time the colony's status changed from trustee to royal? I hope all of you learned a lot from today's episode of History in a Hoodie about the royal period. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Just kidding, I don't care about that stuff. But do make sure you study this lesson. Bye now.